What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to episode 27 of Bound to Improve. My name is Lennon Eller.
And I'm Chris Pound, and the book that we decided to read this week was The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz. And so kind of the central theme of this book was the inevitability of challenges and how successful leaders navigate crises. When thinking about most management books, it's kind of talking about how to manage when times are good. However, this book kind of did the opposite and really talked about what it's actually like trying to manage and grow a business when times are tough.
Yeah, so before we get into the good stuff here, who is Ben Horowitz? He is a venture capitalist, entrepreneur, and author known for his expertise in building and managing tech companies. He co-founded Andreessen Horowitz, one of Silicon Valley's most influential venture capital firms, alongside his business partner. Before that, he was a co-founder and CEO of Opsware, a software company that was sold to HP for $1.6 billion in 2007.
Yeah, throughout the book, it really goes through all the difficulties that Ben and his team had to go through. And so we were able to go throughout the entire book and kind of pull out the key things that we felt are going to add the most value to our audience. First being the CEO mindset. The struggle is inevitable but necessary for greatness. And so here are a couple strategies to endure, to kind of keep a cool head and maintain your composure.
First is don't share burdens or don't shoulder everything alone. You have to be able to share your burdens when possible. Ben talked about throughout the book multiple times when he was staying up, couldn't sleep at night for problems that they had, but he wasn't even the right person who could solve it. Like, he talked about problems in the code, but he didn't know the nuances of the code. So give that problem to the engineers who are going to be willing to and probably excited to solve that problem.
Yeah, the next thing here is kind of there's always a move. Business is like chess, not checkers. When your back is against the wall and you're dealing with things that are constantly coming at you, you always have options, so never limit yourself to doing this or that. Right? Keep the mindset that, okay, if I do this, I can also do this or this. But if I don't do this, okay, how is this going to affect my company and my bottom line?
Yeah. Next here is survival can lead to luck. So take Murphy's Law, for example. Anything that go wrong will probably will.
Yeah.
And it will. But to the same extent, if you are able to stomach that pain or something that goes wrong and survive until tomorrow, you increase your odds of being successful or things turning out right. So at a certain point, allow your survival to turn into luck.
At the same time, don't take all the struggles personally. You have to always keep the mindset that if you keep all the problems onto yourself, and it's like a million-pound weight on your shoulders, and at some point you're just going to collapse. Right? You got to share what's going on with the company, and so that's what it means by don't take the struggles personal.
Yeah. Lastly, is this is the defining moment. This is what you signed up for. Why you're putting in all of the long hours. It's to achieve that greatness that you were always sought out for.
Yeah. With that in mind, when things go wrong in your company, nobody cares. The media doesn't care. Your investors don't care. Your board doesn't care. Your employees don't care, and even your mama doesn't care.
Yeah, so Ben inserted a story from the NFL here. So Bill Parcells, who's the coach of the Giants, called Al Davis, who's the coach of the Raiders, and said, Al, all my players are injured. I don't know what I'm going to do. How am I going to win? And Al responded, Bill, nobody cares. Just coach your team. And that's exactly what Ben is trying to instill here.
Yeah, spend zero time on what you could have done and devote all the time on what you might do next. You need to keep the mindset that the ability to focus and make the best move when there are no good moves.
Yeah, so the last point in this CEO mindset here is the idea of lead versus silver bullets. What's a silver bullet? It's like a cheat code or that quick fix that's gonna get you to that next step, but it might hurt you in the long run. Whereas lead bullets are rolling up your sleeves, getting dirty, and actually getting the work done. So what that means here is sometimes you can't just take this silver bullet out of your problems. You have to construct a whole bunch of lead bullets to knock away at the problem, even though it might take you X amount of time longer, and it might be X amount harder, but it's the right thing to do now because it's going to pay dividends in the future.
So now let's kind of transition into transparency and telling it how it actually is. When you run a company, you will experience overwhelmingly psychological pressure to be overly positive. Stand up to the pressure, face your fears, and tell it how it really is.
Because the employees understand the nuances of the business, so they will know that everything's not always rosy. So you coming in, instilling that optimism isn't going to affect anything, and they're going to be like they're going to see right through it.
Yeah. It's like flattery talked about, and how to win friends and influence people. People realize when you're just trying to flatter them compared to when you're actually being sincere about what you're saying. But here are 3 key reasons why being transparent about your company's problems simply makes sense. First being trust. Without trust, communication breaks. And as a company grows, communication becomes the biggest challenge. If employees fundamentally trust the CEO, then communication will be vastly more effective than if they don't.
It's like opening the valve and letting all the water run through.
Exactly.
Just that seamless communication makes a huge difference. Next is the brains. The more brains working on a problem, the better. A brain cannot solve a problem that you don't know about, and when you're in these environments where you're having a whole bunch of great people come and work for your company or a company that you are a part of, why not get as many smart people in the room as possible and use all the brain power to solve your most challenging problems?
Yeah, this kind of goes back to when Lana was talking about problems in the code, and instead of Ben trying to fix those problems, he gave those issues to the actual the coding engineers. When you allow people to think freely and be creative on their own, it allows the company to continue to grow over time rather than prolonging that delay. And lastly, the third key thing about being transparent is a healthy culture spreads bad news fast. Thinking, would you want bad news to spread fast? I guess, would you?
No.
No, but...
Well, that's not the idea.
Exactly. A healthy company culture encourages people to share the bad news. A company that discusses its problems freely and openly can quickly solve the issues.
Yeah, so you have to reward this behavior, because most of the time people bring up a problem and say they don't have a solution, so they're almost looked down upon in a sense for not having that solution in hand to solve that problem. So then the next time a problem pops up, they're not going to communicate that problem, and if it just sits under the rug for a while, eventually it's going to come up and cause disastrous problems for the business as a whole. Exactly. So encourage that bad news spreading.
Encourage the dialogue. Ben had an interesting concept called management debt, and I'll kind of let Landon discuss what management debt is.
This occurs when short-term decisions lead to long-term consequences.
Management debt comes in many different forms, such as putting 2 in the box, assigning 2 employees with different skills to do the same role. What's the issue with that?
So short term, this is awesome because you had 2 employees in different departments, and this allows you to keep 2 great employees. However, this creates a whole bunch of organizational headaches. For example, everybody who reports up to them will not know who to report to, who to get approval from, and then this inhibits the ability to make decisions quickly and effectively. So by making that short-term decision to be like, yeah, I'm going to be able to keep both of these awesome employees in my business, it's going to create long-term headaches in terms of you're not going to make decisions fast and effectively.
Exactly. So what happens when you overcompensate an employee? Say they got another job offer from one of your competitors. What happens when you overcompensate that employee to keep them at your firm?
So if you just say yeah, I can do that, I can match what the other competitive offer was, that word is always going to spread. So those people that they work with are going to find out, and then they're going to be like, oh, I can use this as leverage to come back and get my salary raise too. So that short-term decision to satisfy that employee and keep that employee is going to cause a long-term decision where you're going to have to increase the salary of everybody.
And lastly here, no performance management or employee feedback. Without the feedback, it is a bad thing. Without proper feedback, often performance is impossible. The first noticeable payment will be due when someone performs lower than expectations, and people rarely improve on weaknesses that they are unaware of. How can you improve in something if you don't even know it's an issue in the first place?
Yeah, exactly. So it may be a short-term inconvenience because you're like, why do I have to constantly meet with this employee? Like we're working together anyway. It's like, why do I have to set aside time to go over some of these nuances that Chris talked about? And this is where all the important things come up. So Ben also stresses the importance of having one-on-one meetings.
Yeah.
And this is where those problems are able to be voiced freely, and you're able to get feedback into the air, so you're able to let your junior employees grow and prosper. So that time for performance management is extremely critical.
Nobody really enjoys politics in the company, and that was a big talking point in the book. And so Ben gave a lot of good insight on how to navigate the whole political differences. Not really when I say political, I'm not talking about politics in the United States. I'm talking about internal politics. Doing things that are going to grow your career by not doing exactly what you should be. Rather, you're doing things that look good on paper but don't really add any value to the company as a whole.
Yes, the rewarding based on requests rather than on merit and actually doing good work.
Yeah.
So this often starts with the CEO, but it can often be unintentional. So, and this becomes more prominent as the company begins to grow and grow. So here are two techniques that Ben gives on how to minimize those politics. The first is hire the right kind of ambition. You have to look for candidates with the team perspective. So even though you might not be hiring, you will probably still participate in panel interviews. So you have to be able to look for those candidates who are conveying that team message or using we when they're talking about stories of something great that they accomplished instead of the more I focus.
And the second thing here is the strict processes for potentially political issues. Build clear systems around performance evaluations, compensation, organizational design, and promotions. If you have something in place and you follow that, it's a key principle to you. You don't ever need to deviate. You don't ever need to explain yourself on why you're doing what you're doing, because this is how it's always been done, and this is how we're going to get things done. This is how we're going to do it.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
So why should startups and companies in general invest in structured employee training?
There are a variety of reasons that he states in the book. First being productivity. Training is a high leverage activity for managers. What does that mean? It means that the time that they spend putting in training, they're going to get out exponentially more. So this is the numbers for a thinking exercise that he used in the book. Say you put on 4 training lectures. Each one takes an hour of time to present the information. And it takes you 3 hours personally to prepare each lecture. So that's 12 hours in total. So now say you teach each lecture to 10 students. Next year, those 10 students or employees will work a total of 20,000 hours. If the training has a 1% improvement of productivity, your company will gain the equivalent of 200 hours of work.
That's a lot.
You put in 12 hours to extract 200.
Yeah.
So that's what I mean there by high leverage.
Along with that, you also have the performance management. A lack of training leads to inconsistent performance in the management. You almost have to have like a check and balances type of situation, and a system in place. So when people aren't necessarily performing how they should be, you can kind of go look back and see, was the training beneficial or not to an extent.
Number 3 is product quality. Insufficient training results in subpar work from new hires. If you hire someone and do not train them on the historical aspects of what you are creating, then how are they going to know, okay, so that's how it was created in the past. How can we continue to build on that moving forward? And if you had a whole bunch of learning experiences along the way and do not convey those, then it's just going to take more and more time for them to get up to speed, and thus they're going to lack the product quality because they're spending more time on those things that you already figured out, but now they have to go back and figure it out again because they weren't trained on it.
And lastly here, employee retention. Poor training leads to dissatisfaction with managers and lack of learning opportunities. So let me ask you, when an employee is not happy with their progress, is that a manager issue or is that a company issue? Because the company didn't take the time and use the resources to train this person.
It's a high-level company issue because they should be instituting training to their managers, which should then trickle down to their junior employees. And along with the employee retention side, it's also helping you build your career path. So you want to be able to continue to grow as a person and professionally, so that training will ultimately help those new employees get there.
Exactly. There are lots of different training programs that companies can use, such as functional training, managerial training, and then enforcement of these trainings. So kind of we'll talk about what is the functional training aspect.
So Ben talked about it in the context of a CEO should have these functional trainings with their managers, covering the expectations that they should have. So, for example, we talked about performance management. If you want to have that good performance management feedback system, then each manager needs to have a one-on-one with every single one of their members of their team every week. So that is an expectation you set up front. Then you move into managerial training. This probably doesn't have to come from the high level exec team, but can be passed on to let the higher, more experienced managers run it. And here, this explains how you run a one-on-one meeting.
Yeah.
So you can see how the functional training is just setting the baseline, and then that managerial training is really getting into the weeds on those.
Yeah, the functional training is more of like the foundation, and the managerial training is more of like the actual house, per se. But we've worked at a number of different places throughout our lives, and you always hear the concept that culture is so important, and that if you work for a company that has a really crappy culture, you're probably not going to want to work there long. And so why does culture matter?
It just is a way for employees to feel like they fit in and contributing to something bigger than themselves.
Yeah, as your company grows, culture can help you preserve your key values and make your company a better place to work and help it perform better in the future. Along with that, perhaps the most important thing, after you and your people go through the inhuman amount of work that you're about to take on to build a successful company, it will be an epic tragedy if your company culture is such that you don't even want to work there yourself, right? So by having a good culture that you're comfortable and you're proud to say, this is my company's culture and this is what we do to reinforce our culture, is going to not only benefit your company now, but also in a long-term aspect. For example, he talked about the use of profanity in the startup cultures. There are a couple employees who didn't really like the amount of profanity being used at Ben's company, and so what did he do about that?
He thought to himself, and his first thought was, okay, so if we cut off profanity, that means that our hiring pool is going to shrink. Why? Because the hiring pool was from the Microsofts and the Googles, and their cultures use profanity. So if you completely cut off profanity from that company, then you're going to lose out on those top end candidates.
Yeah.
So, but at the same time, he ended up allowing profanity, but it has to be in the right context. It cannot be used for explicit purposes.
Now, along with that, layoffs, they inevitably break the company's culture. So it's extremely important to understand the proper way to fire somebody or to have a mass layoff. And Ben broke it down into 6 steps. First being, get your head right. During a time like this, it is difficult to focus on the future because the past overwhelms you and it sucks. But that's exactly what you need to do. You need to focus on the future, because otherwise you're going to get so involved in what's going on right now that you can't even think about it. And so he always says, get your head in the right place.
Yeah, then don't delay. As soon as you make the decisions that layoffs must occur, that time between that decision and actually laying them off is critical to be short as possible. Why? Because the longer it takes, the more time that it will get out. So the employees will start speculating, and then rumors will spread, and that's just not a good thing to happen.
And kind of along with that, you need to be clear in your own mind why you are laying these people off. Admitting to the failure may not seem like a big deal, but it is. A layoff breaks that trust, and in order to rebuild that, you have to come clean to your company about why you're doing what you're doing.
Yeah, then you need to train your managers. This goes back to the functional and managerial training. So you need to set the expectations of what a layoff needs to be conveyed as, and then you also need to teach them how to properly do this, because it has to come from the managers. It should not come from a third party like HR, because they're going to remember that day for the rest of their lives, so you need to do it right.
You also need to address the company as a whole. Prior to the layoff, the CEO must address the company. The message is for the people who are staying, and the people who are staying will care deeply about how you treat their peers and their coworkers. Because if you treat them poorly, then the odds are that they're probably not going to want to stay in the first place.
Yeah.
If you're firing all their friends, why would they want to stay?
Yeah.
Exactly. So you need to talk to everybody as a whole, and so you're on the same page.
Lastly, is just be visible and be present. You need to be out there and show your face. You need to help. You need to talk through this with people. Help people carry their things through their cars. Be present and show that you care.
Yeah.
So from wrapping up here, we wanted to kind of close the circle. And Ben really talks about embracing a variety of factors, which is one of the main points that he wanted to get across in the book. He talks about embracing the struggle, embracing your background, embracing your unique characteristics, and embrace your weirdness. Everybody was given a unique set of gifts and talents, and it may seem out of the norm from others, but you really need to focus and hone in on this to use them to make the best decisions.
Yeah, great CEOs, they face the pain. They deal with the sleepless nights, the cold sweats, and the torture. Never give up on your dream, and never stop working towards the things that you want to achieve in your life. So that is our key takeaways from The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz. Overall, it's a very different type of management book, but we both feel like there are little things that you can pull out and implement into your everyday life from essentially any book that you get your hands on and that you can read. And the whole concept of this podcast is, giving you guys the key details that we felt were important, and we're just trying to share that knowledge with you.
Yeah, provide some value so you can hopefully implement some of these things that we're talking about and enhance the sides of your professional and personal lives.
Absolutely.
Now, going into our implementations from last week, we read $100 Million Offers by Alex Hormozzi, and the main concept of the book was providing valuable offers to get the customers to buy, and actually providing immense value to them so you can raise the prices and have a more successful business. So what we wanted to do was, for the podcast, we've been thinking about creating a sort of email list / newsletter where we're going to provide more in-depth summaries of the books that we read, so you can take some more time to read through those and extract more takeaways.
Yeah, we don't cover everything that the book talks about. For one, that would take way too long, and two, I think it'd be kind of boring. And so we try to really trim down the talking points that we have. For instance, and The Hard Thing About Hard Things, I had over 10 pages of notes. That alone would take an hour and a half, and that's not very fun to watch or to listen to. And so our goal here is to give you the things that we found were valuable, and to try and convey that to you guys.
Yeah, and that's a work in progress. So we're targeting the second week of May. We'll try to keep the progress updates and see if we can get that rolling here soon.
Yeah, and lastly here, the favorite quotes that we had from The Hard Thing About Hard Things. For me, leadership is the ability to get someone to follow you, even if it is only out of curiosity, by Colin Powell.
Yeah. So my quote for this week was, embrace the struggle, embrace your weirdness, your background, your instinct. Growing up, Ben, he felt like an outcast and he was scared of the world. But looking, like after reading this book and learning about all the things that he went through, he embraced the struggle. He embraced his weirdness. He embraced his background, his instincts. And it just got him to where he was today. He pushed through everything, didn't let anybody tell him otherwise. And I think that's just an awesome way to go about living your life.
Yeah, and if he didn't embrace the weirdness and his background and his instinct and the struggle, we would never know who Ben Horowitz is in the first place. And so by really digging into kind of what you're doing, you're building your name, you're building your legacy, you're building what people are going to remember you for. And we remember Ben Horowitz for the hard thing about hard things. Well, thanks for tuning in this week.
Next week, we'll be reading The Score Takes Care of Itself by Bill Walsh, who was a legendary 49ers coach. And this is really his philosophy on leadership. So
yeah,
tune in.
Check us out on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Instagram, and TikTok at Bound to Improve. And thanks for tuning in.
We'll see you next week.
Yep.